Okay, guys, we're gonna kick off anyway. Um, where do I begin? Gosh, um, this stuff. Some of the stuff I say to you, of course, you will have heard before. Quite sure you'll know it. It doesn't really matter. Every time you hear it, it turns your attention towards it. So, the truth, the truth is a strange thing because it's numinous. It has an energy in it. So when we hear the truth spoken, it does something to us. We've no defense against the truth. Do you know when something is the truth, that's it. So it's like the absolute is the energy of the self in it, the truth. So when you read, or when you hear this type of information spoken about, it has that energy. And in Buddhism, you could have release through seeing, or release through hearing, or release through tasting, all the different ways, routes that people take towards enlightenment. And what they're meeting in the seeing, or the hearing, or the tasting, or whatever it might be, is the transcendent. There is an honesty, there is a truth, there's an energy within whatever they look at, a mandala, a wonderful picture. You're seeing something behind the painting. If you like, if you look at a great picture in an art gallery, you could sit in front of it for hours because it has this energy in it. Whereas, you walk past another one, it doesn't catch you at all. There's something deep about the first one. It's not there in the second one. So with Jung's writings, this it has this depth in it. It has this knowledge of the self in it. So the information, when you study it, when you read it, when you sit in front of it, it's working on you. You're working on it. No, it's working on you. So it doesn't matter how many times you hear it. You could hear, like I've heard it thousands of times, even the basic information, and I still, it helps me to realize. To see, so sometimes the simplest practices are the best. Just sitting and breathing. That could be a fantastic practice for you to practice all of your life. And similarly, reading basic books on Jung. Um, if you don't have access to his own words, which are not basic, uh, it's useful. It's good practice. Anyway, so one of the things, like when you think that Jung was alive around the turn of the century, the 1900s, I mean, his writings are incredible for somebody who was alive then, before the First World War. And he was right in there with Freud at the very beginning of psychotherapy, the birthing place, you could say, of psychotherapy. So, you know, there's greatness. To talk about Christopher Columbus discovering America. Well, Jung discovered the psyche. Which is better? Which is a greater achievement in a way? Um, so what he has done is, in all of his writings, they're guidebooks. He wasn't really concerned too much with people with neurosis, even though he was a psychiatrist and a doctor and all these things. He wasn't really concerned that much with healing people. He was a student of the psyche, and his writings are more his recordings. Um, he, because of the time he lived, he had the wish to be very empirical about it. So he approached it as a scientist, and um, his recordings are his observations. This is what he saw. He's not making it up. This is what he found. This is what happened. So one of the earliest things I remember just when I'm starting this about him is that I remember reading some of his information about he was treating a patient, and the patient brought in a dream, whatever it was. And, obviously the symbols were in the dream and it was what it was. And then another person came in and they had the same symbols in their dream. And he said, hang on a minute, how could that be so? How could two different people be dreaming of the same thing? And he looked into it, and that you could say that was the beginning of his realization that we have two separate psychological systems working in us. We have a personal consciousness and we also have a collective consciousness. And the collective consciousness is shared by everybody. All the leaves sitting on the tree, the tree shares itself with each leaf individually. Each leaf is part of the tree. So, in the same way, we are part of the collective. You belong to a family. Well, your family is your collective. Your family influence you. You've grown up within your family and you've been influenced by your family. We are influenced by the collective. So this relationship is a spontaneous relationship. It's like somebody sticks a pin in my hand and I feel it. There's no delay or very little delay. And in the same way, the collective and the personal consciousness are in a direct association with each other. They are in communication all the time, not just when you're asleep having a dream. So, us on the outside, me on the outside as Stuart, I am organized completely by what goes on inside of me. We like to think that the jockey is in charge of riding the horse. Well, in this case, the horse is bringing the jockey where it wants the jockey to go. You see, we don't have any control over the unconscious because we can't see it. You're driving your car and all the lights go out in the car at night and you're driving in pitch black. You have no control really over the car because you can't see where you're going. And in the same way, the unconscious, which is organizing us, we have no control over what's going to happen next in my life. I have no control over what I like to think I have control, but sure, I could be dead in a second. I could fall off this chair while I'm talking to you, and that's me gone. Do you know, because the unconscious organizes it so. So this is just the way it is, but it's sort of a fairly strange thing to start looking at it for the first or the second or the third or the 10th or the 20th time because there's a huge amount of learning. I think there's a huge amount of learning to be had in the beginning when you start to realize this stuff that ordinary consciousness, i.e., the awareness that people have out there in the street, is they're completely uneducated about the psyche. Like I went through school, I went through college and all the different levels of education. I'd never learned about surgery. I would have had to go to medical school. Do you know what I mean? Those subjects weren't covered in my school curriculum or university or any of those places where I went. So, in the same way, psychology, depth psychology, is not included. So, people have no awareness of it. So, people have ordinary awareness. People think that they're in charge. We all like to think that, but we're not. So, Jung says the first part of our psyche that faces out into the world, which attaches to our ego, is our persona. So, the clothes we wear, the mask we wear, And he said that the persona, because it faces the world and is organized by the world to some extent, um, like if I hear the door, the doorbell goes and I answer the door, it could be the postman, or it could be a policeman, or it could be a neighbor, could be an old friend at the door, and I immediately have to adapt to whoever it is that's at the door. So my persona is all the time tracking the world. My persona is all the time adapting to the changing world that I live in. What I'm speaking to you through now is my persona. But if I was going fishing, I'd have a different persona. And Jung says that the persona, because it has this relationship with the world, the collective, it is part of the collective consciousness more so than part of our own personal consciousness. Now, what it sits between, the persona sits between the world and my ego. So my ego is something that has been developing for as long as I've been here. So it's all of my personal experiences. Everything that I've ever experienced is part of my ego. And it also has this will to continue. It has this will in it to be autonomous, a will to survive, a will to thrive. It wants to do well. It doesn't want to be experiencing hardship, because the nature of our egos are it is fragility. They are fragile. If I drop the glass will probably break. If I drop my ego will probably break. It's a fragile, sensitive thing. It's like if somebody cut you open and took your liver out and gave it to you, you wouldn't start juggling it. You'd hold it very, very carefully, and you'd want them to put it back very, very gently, because you realize that your liver is a sensitive organ. It's important to you. You don't want it to get damaged in any way. If it did get damaged, there could be dire consequences. Well, in the same way, our ego is a fragile, sensitive, psychological organ, and the persona protects it. The mask we wear protects us from the world. So the relationship between the persona and the ego is one of one covering the other, one protecting the other from the world. We're hiding our sensitivity behind the mask. And if the mask was ripped off, if I suddenly get exposed to the world without being ready for it, that would be a terrifying experience. You see, because my ego is quite fragile. That's the way it is. Then as you go further, he's the ego. I'm going to come back to all these different things, but the ego, alongside the ego, then, or if you go slightly further in, you have what you've heard as the shadow. Now, the shadow and the ego are made up of the same stuff. So beliefs, experiences, the the same aliveness is working through the shadow as working through the ego, but you identify yourself through your ego. I'm quite happy to say I am Stuart. I would be less inclined to say I am Stuart's shadow. That would be a nod type of thing to say, because people wouldn't really understand that shadow and ego are actually the same thing. Now, without going any further, okay, so what we have there, persona and ego, shadow, that's more or less personal consciousness. That's as deep as it goes, personal consciousness. Um, the other components, as Jung would call them, the anima, animus, and the self, they're sort of outside of personal consciousness. They're closer to, they're sort of underneath the collective consciousness. They're at a different level. So at a local level, what's local to me is there's a net coming in. What's local to me within my psyche is those parts, the persona, the ego, and the shadow. What I do business with all of the time, consciously and unconsciously, is the ego, the persona, and the shadow. How are you, Nat? Yeah, that's great.
Hello, yeah,
Yeah,
succeeded.
yeah, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Um, so, my everyday business is the interaction of all these parts. And what's not in my ego is in my shadow. And what's not in my shadow is probably sitting in my ego in terms of human qualities. Because between the ego and its shadow, you have wholeness. I am a whole person. If you stand up in the sunlight and you cast a shadow down on the ground, your shadow is joined with you. It's not separate from you. If you follow your body down to the ground, to your feet, you find the shadow is just growing out of you. So in the same way, the shadow is part of us. It represents the other side, the dark side of the moon. So, his whole journey of individuation was about becoming whole. So straight away, the first item on the agenda is integrate the shadow. Find out about your shadow. Most people have a fairly good awareness of their persona. They know who they are in the world. But most people, vast majority of people, have no awareness of their shadow. And yet, all of the power dynamics, all of my desires, all of my, how can I say it, all of my issues are probably to do with the shadow. You see, so it's a very, very first step. And that, like me saying, sometimes the basic practices are the best, just sitting and breathing. Well, shadow work goes on for your entire life. You'll be 90 years old and you'll be doing shadow work. You'll discover something new about yourself. No doubt about it. I remember my father was very elderly when he died, but he was about 90 years old. And I organized a weekend away for him. And he had a friend who was an equal old age, probably hitting 88 or 89 years old. And the friend was blind, fairly blind. Like he wouldn't have seen people more than 10, 12 feet away. So I booked him into a hotel, brought him down to the hotel, and we were sitting in the lobby. And I said I'd meet them at a certain time. They'd been up in their room and they came down from the room. They were sitting in the lobby. And I walked in and I sat down with them and they were having this conversation like two little boys at, at a loud volume because the two of them were deaf as well as blind. You know, and you're going to laugh at this. They were talking about their penises in the lobby of the hotel out loud with people gathering, collecting keys from the main desk. And peeing and how many times they're going to get up at night and all this sort of stuff. And I immediately thought, oh my God, close them down. Shh. That was my response to it because that stuff is in my shadow. It was it was unpleasant for me to hear that out loud. I had an issue about that conversation. See, so immediately my shadow kicked off and I wanted to shut them up. Do you see how the control, their shadow activated my shadow. And then I immediately was organized to do something, shut them up, close them down, get them out of the hotel, whatever. You see, and that was the nature of the weekend. It was like, the two of them couldn't get the drink into themselves fast enough. It was appalling. The shadow behavior took over, and I ended up having to mind these two 90-year-olds for the weekend. It was awful. Never organized another weekend. Anyway, that's an example, a simple example of shadow, if you like. Now, the shadow, because we're growing up in families, are collective. We take on the family dynamics because we need to get our needs met. We're all the time looking to get our needs met. I want to survive and I want to thrive. So we learn how to manipulate our family in order to get our needs met. I want to be first. I don't want to have to wait. I want mother or father to stay in my room while I go asleep. I don't want them to walk out and turn the light out and leave me alone. So I develop clever ways of organizing them, just as I have organized myself. My shadow and my ego combined organize the environment. And because of they're big and I'm small, they win. They're more powerful than I am. So in my sort of as I lose the battles, I seek other ways to try and manipulate the family. I'm all the time seeking better ways to try and manipulate the group. So the ego, shadow, very much to do with power. See, the ego wants power, and the shadow also wants power. Because without that power, I immediately am thrown into my I could die. Maybe nobody wants me. Do you see? I'm going to be thrown into my worst feelings. My ego will be threatened, and my shadow will activate, and I will be exposed to my shadow. What's in my shadow? Um, in the Greek myth, Perseus and the Medusa, uh, Perseus cut the head off the Medusa by using his shield. He looked, he knew he couldn't look at the Medusa directly because she was so ugly, he could be turned to stone. So he used the shield for the reflection and then off with our head. So in the same way, if the ego is exposed to the shadow, it has this same effect, ego death. If I take cold water and pour it into hot water, the hot water is changed. If I take shadow and pour it into ego, the ego is changed. Do you see opposites? What I accept about myself, ego. What I don't accept about myself, shadow. So if I introduce myself to my shadow too quickly, my ego will go through a whole process of destabilizing, fragmenting, becoming hysterical. It'll give out. It's not going to die easily, but it'll be changed. It'll die. So we will fight to hold on to our power. I don't want to die. And yet Jung said, you show a man his shadow and you showing him his light. If you show a man his shadow, you're introducing him to his wholeness. But I don't want to be whole. My ego doesn't want to be whole. It wants to be powerful, but it wants to, it wants to hold on to its territory, but it doesn't want to be made whole. So these are relationships These are actual relationships. These are not concepts. These are words that Jung used to describe as he was drawing his map, as he was observing behaviors. He was using these words to describe what he was seeing. But what he's seeing is the living examples of people's behavior. You know, you cut somebody open, you take their liver out again, and you hold it in your hand. That's not conceptual. That liver is alive. Do you know what I mean? It's not a concept alive, and it's an actual aliveness. Whereas the car is not alive. You know, there's a difference. So the psyche is part of our organism, the organism that I am. In esoteric teachings, Alice Bailey is a good one to read up on that. She talks about all the different subtle bodies. You know, you learn about acupuncture, you're going to learn about the chakras and the nadis, the energy channels, and acupressure points and acupuncture points. What you're learning about is not physical. It's part of the psyche. So Jung coined this phrase, psychoidal. He said, yeah, you got the psyche, which is a real living thing, ego shadow, and you also have this level of our being, which is psychoidal. It's where psyche meets matter. So the more subtle bodies are psychoidal bodies. So you go to an acupuncturist, sticks a needle in your arm. He's not sticking it in your arm. He's sticking it into a point in the energy body to stimulate the energy body so that your physical body can receive more energy. See, there's a relationship between your physical body and your energetic body. There's a relationship between your ego and your shadow. If you have a blocked energy channel in your body, you're going to know all about it. You'll get sick. If the relationship between ego and shadow is unconscious, completely unconscious, at some point in time, your shadow is going to jump on you and you'll get sick. You'll do something out of character. Oh, I went out one night and I robbed a car. God, you did what? Yeah, I robbed a car. I'd no way of getting home, so I just robbed a car. Shadow behavior. What came over you? I don't know. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. We'd had a few drinks. I wasn't in a full state of mind. I wasn't in my ordinary state of mind. I'd had a few drinks. I was on drugs. You see, my consciousness had been altered, which allowed what was in my shadow to act for me. I robbed a car. You see, now when we act out of the shadow, if our ego is very bright, then our shadow will be very dark. If our ego is very shiny, then our shadow will be very dull. You see, opposites. So you have all these priests over the last 20 years acting out of their shadow, abusing children. Priests, shiny and bright. Child molestation, very dark. Do you see the opposite in it? So if I identify myself in my ego, well, then there's much more chance of my shadow having an encounter with me because I won't see it coming. The relationship between my ego and my shadow will be much more unconscious. There'll be a gap between them. If I identify myself through my ego, I won't see my ignorance. Do you get it? The difference, the unconsciousness of the shadow, my ignorance. So you're driving your car again in the dark, lights have gone out. You're not going to see that lamppost until you hit it. You'll only get minimal notice that you're about to hit the lamppost. Do you see? So there's by working on the shadow, you're bringing consciousness to that relationship by realizing that this is the nature of your psyche. You're bringing consciousness into your psyche. It's now not so dark. Do you see how it works? You're bringing awareness by gaining knowledge, just by reading the books and the notes and going on the internet and researching. You're gaining psychological knowledge, knowledge of the self. Now your self is not so dark. You know where to look for the lamppost. So shadow work goes on for a lifetime because the shadow is the underbelly of the ego. And the ego is like the part of the ship that you can see. And the shadow is like the part of the ship that's under the water. But if you put on an aqualung and dive into the water and follow the ship down into the water, you'll get to the bottom of the ship. But then the water continues on deeper. So the psyche continues deeper than the shadow. And as you swim down to the bottom, what you start to enter into is deeper and deeper and darker water. You're moving from consciousness into unconsciousness. So the collective psyche within us, represented by the bottom of the ocean, you could say, is in a very dark place. We don't see it. We have no great awareness of how the collective is organizing us. Like if I said to you, each one of you as being Danish, well, how is the Danish collective organizing you? I don't know. And yet I could say, well, the Danish collective seems to create strong women and very feeling orientated men. Different maybe than German men, women, or different than Irish men, women. Do you see, cultural differences are real. Where do they come from? It's this relationship between one level of consciousness and another level of consciousness. So to find out about, you know, your own culture, your own religious beliefs, your own family beliefs, your own generational habits, you're bringing awareness into your psyche at that level. Now, most people, 99%, I'm sure, or more, are not aware of their family dynamics. So they haven't even scraped the surface. Depth psychology is like, what? They've no idea at all. So they're fast asleep. But if you say that to them, their shadow will jump up and probably bite you. You can't point out ignorance to an ignorant person. They'll probably hit you with a brick. So the sensitivity, the fragility of the unconscious ego, the sensitivity of the ego, we're defended by our persona in the world. But if you expose the ego, the person has no ability to protect themselves. You see, and then their shadow will attack you. Their shadow, instead of them embracing their shadow, their ignorance will attack you. So, you know, this is the basis of most arguments, most conflicts. Somebody's shadow is being exposed. It's a power dynamic. And it's usually, I won't say usually, but an awful lot of it is based on the family dynamic. What I learned in my family might be different than what you learned in your family. So, which one of us is going to survive? You go to work and you're working alongside somebody, you know, what they learned in their family is different than what you learned in your family. Either get on or you don't. Now, if you get on, that means your shadows and your egos are somewhat parallel. There's a similarity. There's a parallel process. Oh, we get on very well together. We have a parallel process. There's a similarity. Whereas somebody who's in conflict, there's no parallel process. Now, it's like two metronomes. You know, a metronome on a piano, keeping time. Click, 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 click. You start off two metronomes and one is slightly out of sync with the other and listen to them. You know, you'll hear them starting to diverge. Clickety, clickety, clickety. It'll get a bit weird for a while. And then they start moving back into a sort of harmony together as the beats come together. And then they separate again and then they come back together. Do you see, it's an interesting phenomenon. And in the same way, if you look at people who are completely opposite, they sort of get on together. But if you look at somebody who's not completely opposite, they'll probably fight and fight and fight and have conflicts and power dynamics and do you see, because they're not there's no joining. See, they're directly in conflict. So this is Jung talked about typology, which you can read up on yourselves, intuition, sensation, thinking, and feeling. Intuition and says sensation are opposites, and thinking and feeling are opposites.
Can I ask something?
Of course you can.
Because you say like if if you are completely opposite, then you are not in conflict. But if you are somewhat not opposite, like somewhat similar, then you can become in conflict. Or I didn't really understand it.
Well, there's more likely of you banging into the other person. Like if you got two people sitting either end of a boat,
Mm.
and one person is going to move, both people are going to change positions, and one person is going to move to the left and the other moves to the right, then there's no problem. They're not going to bump into each other. But if they both try to move to the left at the same time, they'll probably turn the boat over.
Mm.
Do you see? So this sort of the dynamic within our personal relationships, like if you're building a team, say you have a business and you want to put a group of people together to work together, there's a whole area developed on this, how to build a team that works. And what you're looking at is the character structures within the people. Like you don't want to be putting intuitives in with sensates because the sensates will drive the intuitives mad. They'll want everything nailed down, proven. Do you see? They want to be able to feel it and touch it and taste it before they accept it. Whereas the intuitives will be saying, "Ah, yeah, sure, we know that's right." They want to move quickly, where the sensates will move slowly. Now, you put them into a personal relationship, it would probably work because the roles given to each within the personal relationship, the sensate will probably end up looking after all the home stuff, and the intuitive will probably start looking after all of the outside stuff. One facilitates the other. So relationships of opposites generally work until they stop. And then there'll be an almighty battle, and then they'll work again. Do you see? But if you have two people who are quite similar, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It comes down to a personal basis. But anyway, that's the way it works. You get the picture. Opposites, ego, shadow are opposites. So you expose the ego to the shadow, it'll be turned to stone. It needs to use its consciousness to be able to look at the shadow. The ego has to have awareness in order to look at the shadow. So having knowledge of how the structure is, how the psychology is, having knowledge of the inside is our consciousness that we use to look at the shadow. We can look at the shadow through that. Okay. Any questions? Yep, Lisa.
Um, so when you talk about psychoidal,
Psychoidal, yeah.
yeah, and you talk about how that is the relationship as I got you. I was a little bit I couldn't follow. So the
Psycho
relationship between the body and the psyche, right?
yeah, Jung said there's a realm of existence called psychoidal.
Mm.
It's an actual realm where the psyche becomes material. So I
Yeah,
suppose if you want to talk about ghosts, there's a good example of stuff happening in the house. There's something of the invisible world affecting the visible world. It's happening at a psychoidal level where one meets the other, the edge. Do you see if you had the left hand bank of a river and the right hand bank of the river, if you could suddenly join them together,
mm.
see two different things. Now, in terms of the energetic nature of the psyche, Jung says there's the psyche is invisible to us, but we see it through its affect. We see it through our behaviors. We can identify its reality by looking at ourselves. So psychoidal, that term he coined in many terms, but that word was a word that he created to describe a certain type of phenomenon. And also later on, you'll hear it again to describe other things. Yep, Sandra.
Um, I'm just gonna ask in Danish because I'm not sure I understand. Er det psykosomatisk, vi snakker om lige nu?
Det ved jeg faktisk ikke. Hvad siger du, Annette?
What's your question about?
My question is like, is it psychosomatic also? Like, so when something happens in the psyche, it manifests, like, for example, in the body also?
Yeah. It moves through. It moves from one level to another level, from one realm of existence into another realm of existence. Freud talks about that. He says suppressed emotions, they don't go away. They just change form. So repressed emotions will reappear as something else in your life. Now, Jung had a slightly different way of wording it. Repressed emotions are pushed into the shadow, into an area of consciousness called the shadow, an area of consciousness that we are not aware of, the part of my ego that I am not aware of. And that could be my body. So body as shadow. Most people who are interested in depth psychology will be intuitive. They'll have a strong intuition. And that's what's pulled them into the study of this subject. So their body will represent shadow to them, the unconscious. Because sensate and intuition are opposites. So the body is the sensate function. So, for example, my type, I'm an introverted, intuitive feeler with thinking and sensation. Sensation is my inferior function. Intuition is my superior function. So I rely on my intuition. I would think nothing about just jumping in the car and heading off on a 3,000-mile journey, and I wouldn't look at a map. Ah, sure, we'll get there. We head this way. Just see, I rely on my intuition. My thinking function is my tertiary, my secondary function is feeling. And my third function, tertiary function, is thinking. Now, Jung says we develop our secondary and tertiary functions. We don't develop our superior function because it is already developed. We develop our secondary and tertiary functions. So, me as a character, over the course of my life, I have developed my feeling and my thinking. My thinking is closer to my inferior function. So, I'm not that clever. But through my life development, I've pulled it up into awareness and I've developed my thinking. It has become more evolved over years from being in business, from doing this, from doing that. Do you see, it's like a muscle I've exercised. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. Now, feeling, when you're talking about typology, feeling is not emotional feeling. Feeling is evaluation. It's how I proportion value. What do I feel about it? Is it important to me? What value do I place on it? So it's not quite the same as emotion, although they go hand in hand. Now, the inferior function is the shadow. So what you find in the inferior function will very definitely be part of your shadow. Yep. Lisa, yeah.
Yeah. So the inferior function, that's the last one, right? The fourth one.
That's the
Will
deepest one. Yeah.
yeah. It will definitely be in your shadow. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we'll
Okay.
definitely have shadow. Now, Jung says we can't approach the inferior function because we can't see it. It's like approaching the unconscious. It's like walking into a dark room. Well, what was in there? I don't know. Couldn't see. It's dark. See, I'm not going to benefit. There's no developmental bonus to me in trying to work on the inferior function because it's too dark. Whereas if I work on my secondary and tertiary functions, feeling and thinking, I'm going to pull the inferior function up into awareness. Do you see? So as yeah, Christina.
Um, is Can you like with the four functions, can they change place if you go through some major life changes?
They can, but it's unlikely that your superior function will change from being your superior function. Your secondary and tertiary functions could equal out. Do you see your left hand strength in your left hand side and the strength in your right hand side could become quite balanced.
Yeah.
And that's probably as good as it gets, which allows you access to the inferior function a bit more. Yes, Lisa.
When you say we have the first one, I don't remember what you call it, but the main one, is that because when we are born, do all four functions exist, and then we are molded into that the one is the most one, or are you born with one?
You're born with potential. We're babies born and our brain is not myelated. We have not completed our process of growing in the womb. We continue on growing outside of the womb. And as the brain forms itself, completes itself, our ego naturally begins to develop, our character develops as our body develops. And it's all part of one organism. So there's nothing separate. The body is just a different type of consciousness to the mind. They're all it's all one organism. Just this is the front end and that's the back end. So we develop differently according to our family and whatever is correct for us. So for example, my partner would be an introverted sensate. My opposite. I'm an introverted intuitive. You see, works very well until it doesn't work. And then we get over it quickly and we're back to working well together. To see how, so we choose in life. We tend to meet people who introduce us to our wholeness. So the what can I say about a lot of people interested in psychology would be intuitives. A lot of people doing clerical work and that sort of accountancy work, librarian work, they'd be sensates. Thinkers, you know, obviously would be clever people who are working with cleverness and intellect. And feelers, you know, people in the caring professions, intuitive feelers, counselors, therapists, doctors, nurses. Nursing might be more of a sensate position because they're in direct contact with patients and having things right, recording, you know. So, as a profession, certain character types are more suited to certain professions, and certain professions are more suited to certain character types. But see, this was all Jung's work, you know, turn of the century job. Now, you know, I've spoken so far, I've really only covered the personal consciousness, like one string of the bow. And just like you have, you know, train tracks, the train runs on both rails. It doesn't run on one rail. It needs the two rails. So our psyche, in order to remain functioning, needs these two rails, the collective. Until we begin to individuate, until I'm capable of standing on my own 2 feet. Uh, and then what happens is I develop my own relationship with the substantive parts of the collective psyche. Now, I say that the substantive parts because the collective psyche is asleep, because it's the collective of individuals who are asleep. They're not conscious. The collective is not, the people in the world are not conscious. You see, sure, I'm barely conscious and I'm working in this area for years. So at the blink of an eye, I could fall asleep. So the collective is the herd is very much asleep. You know, two people are more unconscious than one person. You go down, you form a club, and the nature of the club mind is a lot more unconscious than individuals within the club. So you'll do your best work on your own, inspired by a group, perhaps. The group will hold you while you do your best work. There's so many elements in it. I'll talk about more and I get further into it. But that collective mind is made up differently than the personal mind. Personal mind is made up of complexes. How I organize my mind. You know, my own experiences, my own memories. So that is processed inside me through complexes, and they're positive. I need them. I have a complex about everything that I meet more than once. Do you know, if I like so mother, father, self, three big complexes. You know, my experiences of mother, my experiences of father, and the experiences I have of myself, my ego complex. And you could say the shadow is also a complex, but the shadow complex really is part of the ego complex because it's shadow ego, same thing. So these complexes organize themselves inside me through my personal experiences. They're very individual. They work for me, don't work for anyone else. But because they are energized areas within my psyche, they also are alive. So each complex is like a sub-ego. It's like a little ego. As I approach my mother complex, the experiences that I have had of my mother start to organize me. I become a different person. If I approach my father complex, different experiences of father, it starts to organize me. I become a different person. Do you see, it's like a sub-ego. The mother complex is creating its own individuality. The father complex creating its own individuality. My ego complex, shadow, creating its own personality. Do you see how because the because what's flowing through me is aliveness. Everything in me is alive. The little bits and the big bits. Now, the bigger the bit, the more autonomy it's going to have. So if I have a well-charged mother complex, when I approach it, it'll take me over. It'll have the strength to overcome my ego and it'll organize me. If I have a well-charged father complex, it'll do exactly the same. So the ego is threatened by complexes. Our egoic behavior is organized by these complexes. You put iron filings alongside a magnet. The iron filings are immediately affected by the magnet. You see, you put personality, character alongside complexes. The complexes organize the personality, character. Yep. Sandra?
Yeah, because you say that each complex has its own ego, and then also each complex is affecting the ego, or
Each complex, no, yeah, ego is individual to me. It's my heart, lungs, liver, kidneys. Do you know what I mean? It's me. It's the bit that I identify as. But the complexes inside of me have this aliveness. And as they become stronger, they can challenge my ego and organize me. Like I can start to act out a character.
mm,
As a man, I'm sitting in the room. It doesn't mean a man doesn't matter. As a person, I'm sitting in the room and a woman walks in. And straight away, to organize the woman into somebody I can relate to, I consult my mother complex. Do you see my experiences of women? My mother. So if I have a positive experience of mother, well, then I'll probably create a positive relationship with the woman who walks into the room. Whereas if I have a negative experience of mother, I'll probably project my negative mother all over the woman and won't have a positive relationship. The mother complex in me will challenge my ego and pull it out of neutrality and color the water. Now, if very loosely, if you say father represents authority and mother represents nourishment and safety, then you'll see that it'll give you a starting point in terms of the parental complexes. The mother complex is separate from the father complex, is separate from the mother complex. They're two separate things. And yet equally I have a parental complex. So I say to you, well, how was last Monday? And you say, well, Monday was a terrible day. And I say, well, how was Tuesday? Tuesday was a good day. How was Wednesday? Wednesday wasn't too bad. Thursday was fantastic. And Friday was miserable. Okay, how was your week? Oh, I had a reasonable week. To see how the mind is always grouping things. I take the individual days and I put them together and I call it a week. How was last week? Well, last week wasn't too bad. What was last year like for you? Well, it was quite a good year. Do you see? And yet you might have had your shittiest experience last year. It was quite a good year, bar that one day. So there's an example of mother complex, father complex, parental complexes, family complex. Do you see, it's the way I do business with my experiences. It's how I process things. Now, if you walk down the garden and you walk the same path down the garden, sooner or later you'll kill the grass where you walk and you'll create a path. Do you know what I mean? There'll be a muddy path going around the garden. And in the same way, our psychological dynamics follow the same sort of thing. We create habits. So I form an opinion of women based on mother complex. I form an opinion of men based on father complex. I form an opinion of people based on family complexes and so on and so on. Do you see? And it's just another way of becoming unconscious. As soon as I become unconscious, I open the door to my shadow. Because now I'm at the same level as my shadow. Yep.
Could you say, as soon as you're unconscious, then the complex that you're nearest to this situation that you're encountering is taking over?
The
But the
complex,
complexes
yeah,
are
yeah.
in the shadow, right? Or because
The complex inside of me will pull me towards it, and I will become unconscious as I enter the field of affect of the complex. Because the complex is not in touch with reality. The complex is my story. It's my library of experiences. Do you see? So the more I am possessed by my complexes, the more unconscious I am to reality. What's happening right now. So Jung says, how do we know we're in the grip of a complex? When we start we experience its affect, it could be an emotional affect. It could be our mood. It could be just a malaise of tiredness. Oh, I'm just tired all the time. Where's your aliveness gone? The energy is going into the complex. I'm trying to sort out my issues. Do you see the psyche? Carl Rogers said the psyche is a self-regulating system. It's healing itself. It's restoring balance to itself all of the time. So, somebody who withdraws into themselves, they're probably trying to sort out their issues without realizing it. And the energy is going into the complexes, not their ego complex, going into some other complex. Now, each complex is organized around images because it's how your mind works. So your mind is based on imagery. If I say, don't think of a red car, you all see a red car. My red car could be a Renault. Your red car might be a Ford or a Ferrari. Do you see? So it's all very, very individual. But the imagery contained within each complex will be our personal experiences. Now, does that represent reality? Hang on a sec, Sandra. I'll get you in a sec. Does that represent reality? No, it doesn't, because the complex is my experience, not the reality of the situation. Like I might say that black dog is coming to bite me, whereas the black dog might be coming to lick the head off me. Do you see? But because I have this experience in me in the beginning about dogs, I see all dogs as dangerous. Sandra, yeah, what you want to ask?
Um, I want to ask if also like you say, think of a red car, and immediately my mind goes like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to think of a blue car. That is also a complex in itself, right?
It's a complex with authority.
Okay.
So I say left and you go right.
Yeah.
You're challenging, you're rebelling to my authority. You're not letting me in. Do you see how it works? Father issue. Do issues around authority could be father issues. They are father issues, but they might also be part of a mother issue. Do you see? But then father didn't come in to balance mother. Father didn't protect me from mother. So it's a father issue. No, it's not. It's a mother issue. It's a parental issue. Yeah, exactly. Do your head in. So anyway, the complexes are very much cognitive at one level. So they operate with images. But the complexes also bring us into our unconsciousness. So they're not cognitive, they're physical, they're body based. Do you see, the root of the complex is in my inferior function. So it's quite likely that the feeling tone of the complex will be unconscious. So if I said to you, well, listen, talk to me about your self-image, how you see yourselves. Nobody in the room is likely to start saying, well, I hate myself. They'll say, well, I don't really like myself, or I have a good relationship with myself. They're not going to fall into their emotion immediately. Like we wade out into the river. Do you know what I mean? We slowly go into the deep water. And in the same way as the complex pulls us in, it's pulling us into a place where we're out of our depth. And the images change. So the images that I might accept from my shadow might be quite pleasant images, whereas the actual image that's at the heart of the complex could be the Medusa. Do you see? They're not always first glance, they can change. Now, the complex, because it represents a gateway to the unconscious, each complex has an archetypal core. So it's like the double helix when you look at DNA and you see the little crossover bit joining one strand with the other strand. You know the image, yeah? The crossover bit. Each complex is in communication with a similar structure within the collective. And what they share together are images. So the complex in the collective is called an archetype. Is it the same as a complex? Well, sort of. No, it's not. Sort of. No, it's not. Do you see? It's a similar structure, but it's different. So the shared images. If I have a positively toned mother complex, well, then the shared image will be the positive image of the collective mother. If I have a negatively toned mother complex, then the shared image will be a negatively toned collective mother image. Now, when that negatively toned or positively toned collective image communicates through the complex, you're talking a lot of power. So I get pulled into the outside of my complex. My behavior changes a little. I get pulled into the heart of the complex and I lose my mind. The complex takes me over because of the power of the collective image. Do you understand? I get possessed by the archetype. I'm possessed by the complex at one level, but as I get pulled into it and become more unconscious, there's a greater risk of me being possessed by the archetype. So instead of just giving out to the shop assistant for giving me bad service, I go back in and I shoot her. Do you see? Different level altogether. Okay. So the collective is like that. It has this, it's like the local power station. Each time you walk past it, your hair stands up. It has a huge affect. Any archetype has this huge affect. And we are identified with archetypes through our complexes. Now, Jung says the central organizing archetype within the collective is the archetype of the self. So the archetype of the self, yeah, the archetype of the self,
Just say what you
basically,
said.
yeah,
So
okay, Lisa, go on, yeah.
I lost the thread. Sorry.
Okay,
So the
Jung said the central organizing archetype within the collective structure of the psyche is the archetype of the self. So everything comes from the self, capital S. Life is organized through the self. Self comes first. The self comes first. It's the top of the ladder. And everything else comes out of that. Mother, father, self, small s. Yep. Lisa.
sorry, I just don't. It's like I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh,
There's something blocking. I no, it's I can hear, but it doesn't go in my
okay.
ears. It's like
Okay.
there's something.
You join a company. You get a
Yeah,
job in a company and you go along and you meet your line manager. You know what I mean? Okay, you're in charge of me. I'm going to do as you say. That's fine. And then suddenly the CEO of the company walks in. Do you know what I mean? You've never met the head woman before, the head man before. Everybody bows down to the CEO. Okay, so it's a hierarchy of power. So the power of creation, what creates what? The archetype of the self creates everything. It's like the CEO. Whereas what we do business with really is, our local our local line managers and boss and so on and so on. But the archetype of the self is behind it. Yeah, Sandra.
Yeah, it's because didn't you just say that the archetypes are in the collective and not in the
That's right.
in the
Yep.
so then I don't my
They
brain
join
cannot.
together. They just like you have a left hand and a right hand. Do you see, before you put the pen in your mouth, you are holding the pen in your left hand and your right hand. Just go back to do that. Hold the pen at both ends. Yeah. Now, the pen is joining the left hand with the right hand.
Mm,
Okay. The images at the center of the complex are joining the left hand with the right hand. The images transmit information. They transmit feeling, they transmit emotion, emotional power, they transmit aliveness. The images are the communication from the collective to the personal. If I say to you, white bull, you imagine a white bull in your mind. If I say to you, black bull, I say, which is stronger, white bull or a black bull? You'll probably say a black bull, probably, because of the image. Probably not a great example. But you see, that's how they communicate. They communicate through the imago. Now, Jung used the word imago for the image in the archetype, and he used the word image for the picture in our mind. The imago is the primordial image. It's the one that was there 2 million years ago. You can trace it all the way back to the beginning of time. So sunrise, sunset, do you see these sort of images that are drawn on cave walls? We look at the sunrise and the sunset and we're moved by it because there's the power of the image. See the crucifix. It has power, it has numinosity within it. These images are powerful images. Okay, so our culture then will have its own set of images. Our religion will have its own set of images, symbols. Our family will have its own set of images. You sit here, I sit there. Dad sits at the top of the table. Mum's working around serving people food. It's an image. Do you see? It's how the family operates. And we create habits around these images. Our behavior is organized by the image. And the behavior is habitual. We're all the time falling asleep. We're all the time sinking into the unconscious. It requires effort to stay awake, to stay conscious. We have not developed the muscle of the mind to remain conscious for more than a short period of time. Okay, guys, so the collective unconscious, I'm talking about archetypes. So the archetype of the self at the top. And then there's a multitude of archetypes, just like there's a multitude of complexes. So you read books and they say, here's the 4 main archetypes. Here's the 10 top archetypes. Yeah, whatever. If it sells the book, that's great. But there's a multitude of archetypes. So don't get lost in those sort of books. Recognize, go and read Jung directly about archetypes. Get the real information. We're going to have a break, but not just yet. We'll go for another maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll pause for a coffee break or whatever. Okay, so this relationship between the personal and the collective happens at one level within the complexes. Yeah, the transfer of images. It also happens directly through the anima and the animus. Now, the anima and the animus as psychological organs are much deeper than the ego and the shadow. But if you think of the archetype of the self creating men and women, well, the first creation was masculinity and femininity. Do you see, before any man and woman could be created, you have to create the opposites of masculinity and femininity. So this is very much where the anima and the animus would be situated at that level. So it's a very early stage. It's a very deep level within the unconscious. So what we're talking about is the quality of masculinity and the quality of femininity. And in order really to get a sense of, in order really to have a direct experience of the anima and the animus, you gotta sort of be, how can I say it? They operate through the shadow. Because they are deeply unconscious, they operate through the unconscious. The light shining through the fog is coming from a mile away. But you can't see more than 6 foot into the fog. there's a car coming down the road towards you, shining its lights, and you can only see 6 foot into the fog. You see the fog starting to glow as the car starts to get closer. Okay, we see the affect of the animus and the anima like that, and really they happen through the relationship of ego shadow, because that's the entry into unconsciousness. You need to be unconscious for the animus to take you over. A man needs to be unconscious for the anima to possess him. So the first thing we work on is our shadow. And through that, we start pulling the anima and the animus more up towards us, just like working on your inferior function. So the animus is a big deal with women. It's going to be your life's work to try and sort out your animus issues, because it's the voice in you, it's the mind in you, it's your spirit. It's what brings aliveness to you. It gives you discrimination. It's the masculine quality of logos. It's the power of your mind. Do you see? It's the masculine quality of logos inside of you. And similarly, the anima is the feminine quality inside the man of Eros. Now, a man is born as a man and a woman is born as a woman. So I'm born into my logos and you're born into your Eros. But the logos, which makes you whole, is your animus. And the Eros that makes me whole is my anima. But before I can do any work at that level, I find wholeness through women. Women representing Eros. And women find wholeness through men, their partners. We project it outwards because we're closer to the world than we are to the self. Okay, guys, time for a break because this gets heavy.
Sorry.
So, yep. Somebody have a question there? No? Okay. It's 7 o'clock by my time over here, 8 o'clock your time. So 10, 15 minutes. How long do you need? 10 minutes enough? If you can try to gather back after 10 minutes, and sure, we'll see what happens. 15 minutes, you'll probably forget everything and I'd have to go back to the beginning and start again. Don't feel like doing that. Okay, so 10 minutes. Cup of tea time. Okay. Okay, guys. So this animus thing, it's the most complicated part of Jungian theory, if you want to call it that, the whole nature of it. And yet it's quite simple. When you read it, it's quite simple. Say, oh yeah, I got that. But no, you don't got that. That keeps growing with you for years and years and years. And slowly you begin to realize that as I individuate, as I start to step onto my own path and let go of my family, that's the first collective I've got to break free from. As I let go of all the family ways in myself and start to becoming more authentic within myself, finding my ways rather than my family ways. You see, that's the first separation. Then I've got to separate from all the other collectives that I'm organized by. And yet at the same time, I got to get on with them. I can't just leave the world. Do you know what I mean? I can't just go and live in a hut in a forest at the top of the mountain. To individuate, to be an individual. I got to relate with the world and I got to relate with my family and I got to relate with people. So I've got to bring quite a high level of consciousness into all of my complexes. I've got to integrate quite a big chunk of my shadow in order to individuate and let go of these collectives. And then as I start looking at the anima and the animus inside me, I see that they are the gateways to the god and the goddess. They are the psychological functions that stand in front of the self. So as I'm developing a relationship, a more direct relationship with the self, I have to go through the anima and the animus. Just like, people over here in Ireland for years would have quite willingly given all their power to the priest, and the priest then would introduce them to God. You go through the priest to get to God. And the priest can tell you what experience you can have and what experience you can't have. So these two functions very much determine the experience you're having within your life of aliveness. Now, even that statement is a complicated statement. So at a basic level, at a very sort of shallow level, the animus as masculinity has a will to power. Masculinity is the will to power. Masculinity wants to change your shape. It wants to control you. The hunter-gatherer. It wants to overpower you. The first thing you tried to do with father was push him out of the way. The Oedipal stuff. The first thing you did with father is you tried to replace him. Do you see this will to power, this will to get my needs yet, this will to survive? So as the animus constellates inside a woman, she experiences this will to power. And because the will to power is coming from such a deep level inside of her, it completely will pull her into her unconscious. So the will to power in a woman is acted out through her shadow. As soon as the will to power constellates, she will be drawn into her shadow, and the will to power will express itself into the world through her shadow. Now, the proper place for the animus is behind the woman, inside the woman, supporting the woman, so that she become a strong woman. But if the woman is in any way unconscious, this will to power will move through her unconscious and will start to organize her world. So she becomes a bossy woman. She becomes the woman in charge. And it gets worse and worse and worse, because once the animus has access to the world, it won't want to leave it. What masculinity lacks is eros. Eros as a force of connection. Eros as a gathering of things. Eros as something that leads to wholeness. Our experience of love is a human experience of eros. Our experience of love, human love. But human love is hugely influenced by shadow. Do you see? I want to possess you and control you and all those things. I want to live through you and swallow you up and all those things. So So conscious love is about letting somebody go. Unconscious love is about moving so close to them that there's no separation, confluence, enmeshment. Conscious love is about spaciousness. Now, the animus in a woman, when it's behind her, helps her to become conscious. One of its functions is to teach her and inform her and guide her until it achieves its potential, which is its highest potential is sainthood. It is the voice of God in her. But it begins as an ape. It begins as a gorilla. So the four stages of animus development, I forget now what they are. I know the first one is Bluebeard. It's it's like the guy that jumps out and hits you with the club. You know. So you could read up on that. You can Google four stages of animus development and you can read up on it. Um, but there's similarly four stages of anima development in a man. The anima in the man represents his soul. The animus in a woman represents her mind. So the soul of the man is heart. Now the woman is born as heart. The woman is the birthing of a heart. That's what femininity is. Uh, so the joining between animus and woman is a joining of logos and eros. Do you see? The animus supporting the woman becomes a unit, represents her wholeness. Now, if the animus enters the world unconsciously, because it enters the world because the woman is unconscious. Why is she unconscious? Because she has a poor self-image. She doesn't have a strong image of herself. So the woman is not fully conscious. So the animus comes through her, doesn't recognize her eros as enough, and steps out into the world searching for eros. And the way it does that is it'll make collections of useful things. So an animus-driven woman will have a list of useful people. It could be, the animus will show you its treasure. The animus will show you its skill. It can be very, very skillful. So the woman could be a tremendous organizer. She'd be a great woman. Do you know what I mean? The best woman you could find. But she's not a woman. She's a man. She's organized by maleness. So slowly the woman is replaced. Slowly, over years, 20 years, the woman, her femininity is replaced with masculinity. I know women who once a month wear a suit and smoke a cigar. Once a month. Because they need to do it. There's the animus. And in a society, in a culture where women are so strong to begin with, you would see a lot of animus-driven women in Denmark. But it doesn't mean they're animus possessed. It's just the strength of the woman. Denmark has strong women. Scandinavian countries seem to produce strong women. They're not animus possessed, but they're animus driven. Now, the possession is the takeover. And once the woman is taken over by the animus, she is replaced. It's an actual possession. So in working with that, what you have to do is you have to ego build the woman. You have to bring the woman, introduce her back to her femininity. You have to introduce her to all things feminine, and you have to educate her to educate her mind. You bring her back to the aliveness of her heart so that she can begin to educate her mind out of being all power, you know, all power and mighty. Educate her mind by saying, you don't know all of me. You're not my heart. You may be my mind, but you're not my heart. You just represent my thinking. That's all. But you don't represent my feeling. And my feeling is much bigger than my thinking. And get her to reclaim her life through introducing her to sensuality, feeling, and womanly things, femininity. It's different than a man. Yep. Yes, Sandra.
Yeah, I needed to unmute. So like how does it come into some sort of balance when you say like Danish women are like this, we are strong women, or Scandinavian women are strong women, and then you talk about okay, then but we need to empower. That's how I hear you say it. Empower the anima.
You have
But
to, you have to, you have to remain a woman. The
mm,
challenge is to remain a woman and not to follow the will to power, not to follow the mind. Follow your heart. Lisa, yeah.
Can, so I'm not quite sure I get the will to power sentence. I mean, it's the translation of it. I do understand the words, but what is this driven
The,
to have
the,
power over others, or is it?
it's a claim for territory.
Ah,
So it could be the unconsciousness could come into the mothering role where the woman is overpowered with being a mother and she loses her identity into being a mother. And then the mother swallows all the children. She takes over the children's lives and she
hmm.
micromanages her children. Do you know? And she consumes them, same way as a wild animal would consume her young. See, becomes the negative mother. And that is the will to power. Love is lacking where will to power exists.
Ah,
So,
yeah.
so you have to remind that person that they are a woman, not a mother, and not boss. They're not in charge of their children. She may have given birth to her children, but her children are separate from her and have their own lives. Do you see, Sandra again? Yeah.
mm, but how does that come into play with, for example, people who shift genders? Transgender people and stuff like that. How does all of this fit in? Is that because,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
a whole different bag of spiders. Do you know what I mean? Then it gets very complicated. You think it was complicated? No, it gets very complicated. But the same principles apply to that you've got anima and animus as basic unconscious functions within the psyche, operating through all of us. Now, the anima is the how can I describe it? It's the field of perception in my mind. It's the way I put form on things, the way I perceive, the way I take in information, not the way I process it, but the way I take it in. It's my apperception of life. So the anima's skill is in the power of delusion and seduction. She can create the image that I fall in love with. just like that. She is responsible for my desire, the emotional force inside of me. Do you know what I mean? The feminine soul within me, which is feeling based. I value it. Now, if I ignore my emotions, if I repress my emotions, well, then, in effect, I'm rejecting the anima. I'm pushing the anima away. And she will take on the face of my rejected emotions. So I will have a very difficult life because I'll keep meeting the face of my rejected emotions. You go into a ward in a hospital and you go to the male ward and the men will be quiet and they won't be complaining, but be one guy in the corner who's giving out all the time. Anima possessed. He's consumed by his emotions. Nothing is right. The cranky man. Do you know what I mean? Nothing is right. The room is not right. The nurses are not right. The doctors are not right. The medicine is not right. How he feels is not right. Nothing is right. The food is no use. He's having a fight with everything because he's having a fight with his anima. He's repressed his emotions. He's been consumed by his negative mother complex. The unraveling of this is not easy. It's like your Jung said the shadow integration work is the apprentice work. And anima integration, you want to call it that, not integration. The animus work is the opus of your life. It is the main work of your life. So shadow integration is easy compared with anima and animus. And the more you go into it, the more you begin to realize. Now, why is it introduced so early on, if you like, in somebody's process? Because we all begin in a state of unconsciousness. So you as women, beginning ordinary consciousness is unconscious. Yep, Sandra.
Sorry. It's because I would appreciate it if you could give some examples also, because we're talking about the woman and the anima and animus in women. But can you give an example? For example, if a man is possessed by any anima, how would that look? For example,
Frankie man, the man who
Frank.
never stops giving out. Nothing is good enough for him. He's at war with his emotions. His emotions are at war with him. He'd probably have high blood pressure and have a heart attack.
Okay.
I'm not saying he will, but he might have. The anima becomes a witch. She becomes the mother complex. This stuff grows into us from our early childhood, from our families. So we're sorting out as we walk our path, we're basically sorting out our family dynamic. Now we get to a point where enough has been done and we step into our individuality. And at that point, then there's a different journey begins because now I'm free of the family karma. To a large extent, I've broken free of the generational stuff and I am my own self. But that happens a few years into it. Do you know what I mean? The process doesn't begin, at the end of the race. The process begins at the beginning of the race, which is where we all begin from, and we're all beginning from unconsciousness. So women who are unconscious need to look at their animus issues, this will to power, their want to control everything, their angry baby, the want to control everything. I want to control how the food is put into my mouth. I want to control how you hold the spoon before you put it into my mouth. Do you see the immaturity of the personality? There's a regression within the personality. Yes, Denise.
If I experience, say, the opposite of wanting to control, like if I feel like I don't care at all, does that have something to do with the lack of an animus?
It 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 would be more than likely shadow based,
Okay.
where father issues and mother issues, where there's not a clearly defined image of yourself. So in therapy would be ego building, getting a stronger sense of yourself and your own needs, getting differentiating your own needs from the family needs. So you're not in service to others, not living your life through others as an extension, breaking free of enmeshment so that you can be yourself,
Yeah. Okay.
becoming yourself, and also working on your own source of aliveness, recognizing that your aliveness is blocked in some way and your
Yeah.
shadow is gobbling up your energy.
Yeah.
If somebody's in charge of the wine cellar and all the corks and the bottles are starting to pop, they're going to spend their life in the wine cellar holding down all the corks, and they're not going to spend much time out in life. They'll be too busy holding the corks. Hang on, Sandra. Be too busy stopping the corks from blowing in the. So the shadow is gobbling up all your time and energy, and you don't get a chance to go out and enjoy life. I've no desire to go out and enjoy life because my energy is going elsewhere,
Yeah.
repressing the feelings. Do you see what feelings are being repressed? Well, the feelings of myself, my voice, my desire, my dreams, my ambitions. And in so doing that, you're suppressing the animus. You're pushing the animus into unconsciousness because the animus then in you, the male side of you, doesn't have a clearly defined female to fall in love with. If the self-image is not developed, then the animus has no basis to pause inside the woman. It will automatically step over the woman
Mm.
and claim the territory outside of the woman rather than supporting the woman to become strong. Sandra, you had your hand up again.
Yeah. I'm just mind blown about what you just said. So, let me just remember. Uh, you said something at that point
If it's not
get.
there, don't worry.
I have it. You said that at some point you get away from the family. Was it the conditions, or I don't remember what you said. And then you your own sense of individuality or something. And when does
Oh,
that happen?
hold on. I can't let you away with this. Wait, hold on a minute. Why do you not remember what I said?
I
I
don't
don't
know.
remember what you said. Why do you not remember what I said?
It's because I was just mind blown about what you said to Denise. So yeah.
Because I was mind blown. I was pulled into something else. Do you see, my
Yeah.
attention had been robbed by a complex that fired off inside me. And my attention moved from the outside to the inside. Do you see how it works? Where the tide is coming in and going out. Our attention is coming in and going out all the time. Now, to stabilize our attention, to be able to remain present while life is happening, that's a big deal. So taking what happened there, not wishing to throw it back at you, but taking what happened there and looking at it, it happens to all of us. Do you see? And to stabilize our ability Tall, strong, and steady. So to become steady is steady from the top to the bottom, steady from the outside to the inside. We're stabilizing all these relationships. We need a good enough awareness of our shadow. So, in order to know our complexes, we got to know our shadow. Integrating the shadow raises our awareness. How do you gain awareness? You work on the shadow. Yep. That's right. Isn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
So if you have an unconscious animus, how do you get the conscious? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah. Yep.
is it through
The
shadow?
the
Work with shadow or
if I was working with somebody, I wouldn't necessarily work on their animus, a woman. I would work on their voice. I would work on their presence. I would work on their attentiveness. I would work on those qualities that the animus is responsible for. I would work on her shadow development, her ego development. I would help her to be more of who she is. I would work at the front of the building. I wouldn't be trying to dig in and feed the animus. I'd be feeding the woman at the front. And as she becomes stronger, her ability to hold power becomes more. So if you have a woman who has no voice, a woman who's been subdued by life through circumstances, or just a quiet woman, I would try to help her to sing her song, make her noise, be herself. And that constellates the animus inside of her. To
okay,
constellate, to start to put together. The animus is responding to her call, not the call of the world. Whereas,
okay,
whereas if I said to that woman, you have to be powerful, it's the wrong message. If I said to the woman, I want you to be yourself, that's the right message. So, ego building, you're working at the front of the building, you're working on the ego shadow relationship, and you're helping her to reclaim her personality character from her shadow.
yeah,
Do you see? Then the other alignments naturally happen.
yeah.
Now,
Thank you.
in the case of a man who's anima possessed and grumpy and cranky and all those things, I would probably, what would I do? Tell him to get a fucking grip on himself. That's what I would do. Stop being a crybaby. Ah! I don't know. You take it whatever way it manifests. But I suppose for the anima possessed man, I'd be saying, listen, why are you so identified in the past? What's the big deal? Where's the danger right now? Have a look around you. Tell me what's out of place right now. I'd pull him into presence. I'd pull him into consciousness, out of his fantasy. Oh, the world is coming down on top of me. Mammy left. Do you know? Well, do you want your mammy now? Here, hang on. We'll go out and we'll dig her up out of the ground. Do you see, what are you going to do with a corpse? I'd introduce him to reality. And I try and take him out of his imagined reality. Lisa, yeah.
So sometimes I feel like working with the subconscious is like I don't know if you can see this, but a spiral.
Yep.
Yeah. And that it's like so I'm working a little bit on this complex, and then it moves around. You work on this complex, move around, move,
Yeah,
and it keeps on like going like this. And sometimes the circle gets smaller, and sometimes the circle gets larger.
that's right,
And
yeah.
then I was having the thought that maybe I'm working a little bit on the shadow, and then suddenly I'm working a little bit on the animus relation, then I'm working a little bit. So it's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to go like this because it's all happening at the same time, kind of.
So the sequence, the therapeutic sequence, usually is mother, father, self. A client comes in, we'll talk about mother issues, we'll talk about father issues, and then they'll talk about their own self issues. And then it could be next week, it could be father issues first, mother issues second, self issues third, or next week could be self first. And there'll be mother, father, self, father, mother, self, 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 mother, mother, father, all over the shop until slowly they begin to stop talking about mother and father. And then it'll be self, 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 self. And then it'll be self, big self, self, big self, self. Do you see? They'll be coming more towards a spiritual relationship where their parental complexes have been sort of burnt out sufficiently to allow them to drop through them, to pass through them and connect with their own source. I'm not looking for eros and logos, love and guidance from my parents. I'm finding love and guidance through my own inner connection with myself. So there's a maturity begins to happen within the process that connects us as we individuate, and the same maturity is behind our individuation. We find it, and it's sort of self. No, I won't say that because it'd be confusing. It finds us and we find it at the same time. We start to evolve gradually, and the spiritual path arises within us. In the beginning, we see it as this, and it ends up being that. It changes. So, in terms of ego shadow, what you're looking at is opposites. What I believe, what I don't believe. And Jung says the shadow is 90% gold. So, what I don't believe has lots of good stuff in it. What I refuse to believe might actually be the truth. What I refuse to believe might actually be my path forward. So, in dreams, the ego complex very often, the dream ego, the ego complex or the dream ego very often will recognize the self as something dangerous. I was crossing a field and suddenly I noticed a lion in the long grass. The lion in the long grass could be the self. Do you see? And I thought I was going to be eaten. The lion started coming towards me. The self has something for me. It's moving towards me. It's something to give to me. It wants to join with me. And at the same time, it's a lion. So if I meet a lion in real life, it's dangerous. Meeting the self in a very direct way is dangerous. I could end up having a blowout. My ego couldn't handle it. And I have a breakdown, break up, break in. Do you see Groff wrote a book called Spiritual Emergence? And the subtitle is When Spiritual Emergence Becomes a Spiritual Emergency. So as we emerge out of our unconsciousness, some people do it very slowly and some people do it very suddenly. And the quicker it happens, the more traumatic it is. So trauma equals catharsis. So the more sudden the change, the bigger the catharsis. So people need to be facilitated slowly within their own limits. You can't force the child. Okay, Sandra, hang on. You can't force the child to be an adult. You have to wait for them to grow up. Sandra, yeah?
I just want to ask what catharsis means.
Catharsis is the expression of the emotion. So somebody having a catharsis could shiver and shake. They might break out in a cold sweat. They might go over and throw up in the bucket in the corner. That's a catharsis. They're completing something.
Okay.
When you see somebody crying, they're having their own catharsis. Now, to throw a box of tissues at them at that moment could be the worst thing you could do, because what you're doing is closing them down, telling them not to cry. Whereas to leave the box of tissues on the far side of the room and allow them to cry, and then when they're good and ready to go and get the tissues themselves, that could be the best thing to do, because you're empowering them. You're giving them full space to have their expression, and then they can go and support themselves. So very often in the beginning of working with groups, you'll see the group will be a group of mammies and daddies, adult children, little girl mammies and little boy daddies. And that's ordinary consciousness. And then the group, they'll have their shadow power play and all that sort of stuff. And over a period of time, maybe within the first year or so, the group starts to settle down and people start to mature. Now, the maturity is very much alongside their gaining knowledge of the self. So they're starting to understand their process. You see, in the beginning, you bring your car into the shop to the mechanic and you say, I want to get the car serviced. And the mechanic says, what's wrong with it? And you say, well, I don't know. There's a bit of a noise in it. And he says, what is it? And I said, oh, I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. I've ordinary consciousness. I don't know what's under the bonnet. Do you see? But by the end of year one, people are starting to mature and they have a certain amount of knowledge. And they're able to say, well, listen, there's a noise in the water pump. Or there's a wheel bearing going in the car in the back left-hand side. They have the ability to name it because they've developed, they're maturing. Now, in the people starting off in a group, you'll see the infantilism. You'll see it in the power grabs, and you'll see it in the expressions and behaviors, and do you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, of course that's going to be there. And you try and engage with the people and you try and feed them, nourish them, just as you would an infant, feed them with a spoon. And maybe they'll spit the food back at you and maybe they'll accept it. And slowly, by putting food into them, knowledge of the self, by putting food into them, Jung's teachings and theories, knowledge of the self, slowly they begin to digest that food and gain an understanding. And that represents their path to development. And then, somebody sitting in the group, you'll have, if you've in your group tonight, there's 6 people, 6 individual shadows, 1 combined shadow. You have a group shadow. And that group shadow can speak through any one of you because there's no boundaries in the unconscious. So your shadow could trigger my shadow. Your rejected child could trigger my overly responsible parent. Your emotion can trigger my emotion. And then I speak out for the group, which could be a positive thing, or it could be my enmeshment, my lack of individuality. Alternatively, instead of speaking out for the group, I could say, let the group speak for themselves. I'm an individual within the group. Do you see? So what's the reason for learning, studying Jung? It's to help you develop a psychological awareness and also to emotionally mature you. The person who you begin as, not the person you're going to end up as. So, guys, any questions? I pause. Any questions? I'm going to turn the recording off, I think, or pause it. Okay, so just to take it a little bit further, the I was saying the anima animus work is like the gateway to the self. Because if you think about the relationship between the collective and the individual within the collective, we our spiritual journey, we have religion. So the collective operates within a religious ethos. All collectives, all cultures have religion. So the religious symbology is within our mind. So as soon as I start talking about Jesus Christ, I'm caught up in my culture. Do you see, I've moved away from my personal experience and I'm more identified with my culture as a Christian, living within a Catholic country. Now, the symbols work. The symbol of Christ works. The symbol of the crucifix works. These are very powerful symbols. There's massive power in them, numinosity. But there's also the pull into the collective. There's a pull out of the individual position towards a collective position. It's like I'm having my car parked. As soon as I identify through the collective symbols, I've handed myself over into the collective, which brings me close, but doesn't ring the bell. In order to ring the bell, I've got to go there myself. Okay, so I have to form my own image. I have to form my own belief, my own structure, my own path. The felt experience within me is the path. Now, in the beginning, the path grows out of these collective symbols. And then I begin to realize that the Father is contained within the animus, and the Mother is contained within the anima. And the dance of the anima with the animus is the same dance as mother and father. Father impregnates mother, and mother has a child. Animus impregnates anima, and anima creates an illusion. And I've got to separate myself from the illusory nature of life. It's like, how can I say this simply? It's like starting to see through life. Now, in Buddhism, they talk about one taste. Everything becomes one taste. It starts to lose, special things lose their specialness and awful things lose their awfulness. And it becomes one taste. Do you see the illusion that the anima creates? I sort of lose interest in that path and I develop an interest in the felt experience, a more honest experience within me. Now, the discernment of mind is necessary to discern the difference. That's why it's not a beginner's experience. Sounds very complicated, and I suppose it is to a certain extent. And in the same way, recognizing that power doesn't come to me from the animus as a woman. Power is not coming to you from the animus. It is when you're joined with that. Power is your nature. Do you see? You are the universe. You give rise to the animus. The animus is created through you. Do you see? I'm not the child, I'm the adult. I'm not the young girl, I'm the adult woman. What's the difference between the young girl and the adult woman? What would you say is the difference between the young girl and the adult woman? How does the adult woman feel? And how does the girl feel within yourself? The woman can stand up tall, strong, and steady. She is self supported. She can embrace the world. Yeah, Denise.
I feel like the girl is dependent.
Yep. Whereas the woman,
Is self-sufficient.
exactly. And this is the thing. Okay, Christina, yeah.
And also the young woman is more idealistic and like living more in the illusion, and then the adult woman is more like it can see what is.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a wild femininity. It's like when you if you read the book Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's a big volume of a book, but it's worthwhile getting a copy and read it bit by bit. Now, as a man, I read bits of it. I haven't read it cover to cover. But that sort of wild femininity, it takes the woman into femininity. It takes her beyond herself. It's not civilized. Femininity is not civilized. Like there's a character in Irish mythology, the Baba Yaga, I think, and she lives in the woods, and you know she'll just eat you. Do you know that sort of wild femininity can't be controlled. Now, if you experience the love of nature within yourself, that's totally different level of love than the love given by a parent. To see one is civilized and the other is natural. One is enormous and the other is small. Okay, so in opening your heart, you like in Buddhism they talk about the four immeasurables: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. The reason they're called that is because they have no end. There's no end to love. There's no end to joy. There's no end to compassion. There's no end to stability. It just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's where we start to stand alongside these archetypal figures within ourselves. Do you see, there's certain practices, I won't talk about them now, but there's certain practices that we can do to enable us in that direction, but they're not beginning practices. You need a knowledge, a working knowledge of yourself first. Yeah, Denise.
I feel like I have yet to experience the adult self-sufficient woman because I'm not there yet. I think I'm too young still. I'm getting there. Sometimes I get a sensation, but I'm not there yet.
If we were in a group and if we were doing process work, what I would do is
Yeah,
I would ask you if you want to explore it, and maybe you'd say yes. In which
yeah,
case, I would say to the group, okay, guys, I want you all to become, through posture and movement, to demonstrate your egoic position. So maybe you would wrap yourself up in a ball. Maybe you'd make yourself small in some way. You'd reduce your size maybe. And then when people are in their sort of demonstration of their egoic position, I would then say, okay, on the count of three, I want you to immediately become your opposite. One, two, three.
and then rise.
And the person who was tight in a ball in the corner would start doing star jumps across the room. They'd become their opposite. They'd explode out into the room. You see, the person who was very held in would suddenly go from a contraction into an expansion. And at that point, I would say, so this is what you've been doing with your power, or this is how you've remained hidden from the world. Denise, I don't believe your story about being too young.
No.
I see you in a contraction,
All right.
and yet what goes down must come up. So,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
what come
show me
rise up
the
must come
expansion.
down as well.
So if I said to you, okay, show me the expansion, demonstrate it in a walk, demonstrate it in a dance, in a movement, the expansion with a sound. You know, maybe it would be a scream, or maybe it would be a running around the room really fast. Oh, she's gone. Guys, do you see the okay, pause